1945. The biggest, deadliest war in human history is finally over. Confetti has been swept up, victory parades are a fond memory, and the world is left with rubble. A lot of rubble. And two very large, very suspicious superpowers staring at each other across it. On one side, you have the United States, armed with a new superweapon and an economy that wasn't bombed into oblivion. On the other, the Soviet Union, with a massive army occupying half of Europe and a deeply paranoid leader. They were allies, sure, in the same way a mongoose and a cobra are allies against a lion. Now the lion was gone, and they were left in the room together, smiling politely while wondering who was going to bite first. This was the fresh, optimistic start to the post-war era. For centuries, when the world had a problem, Great Britain would usually show up, plant a flag, and make it their problem. But by 1947, Britain was broke. Utterly, devastatingly, flat broke. Fighting a world war is expensive, and their national credit card was maxed out. So, on a cold Friday, February 21st, 1947, a couple of British diplomats delivered a note to the U.S. State Department. It was basically an eviction notice for global responsibility. It stated that Britain could no longer afford to prop up the anti-communist governments in Greece and Turkey. Their financial support would end in 6 weeks. Washington panicked. This wasn't just losing a couple of minor countries. It was the British Empire, the world's policeman for a century, officially handing in its badge and gun. And guess who they were handing it to? So, why all the fuss about Greece and Turkey? To most Americans, they were just places on a map with nice ruins and questionable plumbing. But to military strategists, they were everything. Turkey controlled the Dardanelles, the only waterway connecting the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. If the Soviets controlled that, their navy would have a warm water superhighway straight into the heart of Europe and the Middle East. Greece, meanwhile, was in the middle of a nasty civil war. You had a weak monarchist government propped up by the British fighting against communist-led partisans. To Washington's Cold War thinkers, this wasn't a local squabble. It was the first tile in a long line of dominoes. If Greece fell, communism could spread to Italy and France, where communist parties were already disturbingly popular. Suddenly, a messy conflict in the Balkans was being framed as the final stand for Western civilization. No pressure. Harry Truman had a problem. He knew he had to act, but the American public had just finished one war and wasn't exactly eager to pay for the world's problems. The Republican-controlled Congress was obsessed with cutting spending. Asking them for hundreds of millions for some far-off countries was a tough sell. So his advisors, particularly Under-Secretary of State Dean Acheson, decided they needed a simpler, more dramatic narrative. In a private meeting, Acheson told congressional leaders that a rotten apple of communism could spoil the entire barrel of the world. The story goes that the staunchly isolationist Senator Arthur Vandenberg was convinced, but told the administration they would have to scare the hell out of the American people to get the votes. And so, a specific regional crisis was repackaged as a global existential struggle. This wasn't about Greece anymore. It was about freedom versus tyranny, everywhere, forever. On March 12, 1947, Truman stood before a joint session of Congress and laid it all out. He didn't just ask for money, he announced a fundamental change in American foreign policy. He declared, "I believe that it must be the policy of the United States to support free peoples who are resisting attempted subjugation by armed minorities or by outside pressures." It sounded noble, heroic even, but free peoples was a wonderfully flexible term. Often it meant not communist, which sometimes included brutal dictatorships, monarchies, and military juntas, as long as they were our brutal dictatorships. The Truman Doctrine, as it became known, drew a line in the sand across the entire planet. You were either with the free world, led by the US, or you were with the other guys. There was no middle ground. He asked for $400 million, which is about $5.5 billion today, a hefty price for a new global mission statement. The speech worked. Maybe a little too well. While some, like columnist Walter Lippmann, immediately dubbed it a strategic monstrosity that would bleed the country dry, most of America got on board. The fear of communism, expertly stoked by the administration, was a powerful motivator. Congress approved the $400 million aid package with surprising speed. This wasn't just a one-time payment, it was a precedent. It was the start of the United States taking on the role of global financial and military sponsor for any nation that pledged allegiance to the anti-Soviet team. This doctrine paved the way for the much larger Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe, which was another way of saying, let's make capitalism look so good that nobody wants to be a communist. It also laid the ideological groundwork for creating the Central Intelligence Agency later that year. You can't fight a global shadow war without a global shadow agency, apparently. So, the immediate goal was achieved. Greece and Turkey did not fall to communism. Hooray! But the Truman Doctrine's logic spiraled into places no one anticipated. This new policy of containment meant America had to be everywhere, all the time. A civil war in Korea? Our problem now. A colonial dispute in Vietnam? Suddenly, it's a front in the Cold War. The doctrine created a permanent state of emergency that justified a massive peacetime military, something the US had never had before. It fueled the arms race, the space race, and the series of proxy wars that killed millions in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. All because of a commitment to defend free peoples, which became a blank check to intervene anywhere the Soviets might gain an inch of influence. It turned regional conflicts into global ideological battles, often with disastrous consequences for the people they were supposedly trying to save. It was the ultimate if you give a mouse a cookie story, but with nuclear weapons. The Truman Doctrine wasn't just a policy, it was a mindset. It locked the world into a binary, us versus them framework for nearly half a century. There was no room for neutrality, no space for countries to find their own way. You had to pick a side. This simple, powerful idea, born out of a specific crisis in the Eastern Mediterranean, went on to justify everything from NATO to overthrowing governments in South America. It was a brilliant piece of political maneuvering that solved an immediate problem by creating a much, much larger one that would last for generations. It's a classic example of historical problem solving. You put out a small fire in your kitchen by flooding the entire neighborhood. The fire is out, sure, but now everyone's dealing with water damage and arguing about who owns which floating sofa. A neat, simple solution with messy, complicated, and incredibly expensive consequences. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more historical insights. Thanks for watching, nerds!